G'day everyone, welcome back to another edition of Guvs Hero Review videos. Today we are going to be taking a look at the current featured hero of the month, specifically the 5-star legendary purple hero, Thunk, the gold hoarding Kingpin. Now I'm going to say from the outset it's going to be really difficult for me not to say Thunk every time I say his name. Just going to bear with me. Thunk has been added as the featured hero of the month for April 2024. During this period of time, there are far and away the best opportunity to actually draw a copy of Thunk, coming in with a 1% chance to draw him across any of the hero summons during this month as a bonus summon. So that excludes basically the weapon and the silver tickets, but any other of these hero summons grants you that 1% chance. So to put that in perspective, if you were to do 100 summons across the entire month of April, you would have a 63.4% probability of actually drawing a copy of Thunk on a bonus draw. After the featured months though, Thunk only becomes available for summons during the Manor of Legends portal, which wraps around once every 4 weeks. However, Thunk is only going to be added to the Manor of Legends 9 months after his release, so it's not going to be until like January or February of 2025 that he appears there. The Manor of Legends portal odds are quite terrible. It is only 1% chance for a featured hero and 0.9% chance for the unfeatured, so when Thunk does make his way into that portal, I have no idea. I probably could work it out, but I don't actually know how many heroes are going to be in the portal. But at the moment, there are roughly 34 or 35, about 36 featured heroes in total in that portal, so the odds are quite terrible. So across 100 summons, you only have a 63.4% probability of getting either of the featured heroes of the month and a 59.5% probability of getting an unfeatured one. Drilling it down onto a specific hero, those odds diminish substantially. So for a specific featured hero of the month, it is a 39.4% probability. But right now, if you were to do the 100 summons going after a specific unfeatured hero, there is only a 2.6% probability of getting that hero. And those odds are only going to fall away further as more heroes are added to the portal. A lot of portal information, so we will move on from that. I will flip over and take a look in my roster and we can have a look at his artwork. Nope, unfavorite. So there's his artwork. So he's a Kingpin. So, obviously that means he's a big beefy boy. I don't know why that association was always made, but he is kind of that gangster, mob, mafia, whatever kind of persona, tying back to that era of time with like the vest and stuff, but he is a bit more flamboyant than I think most of those gangsters were for the most part. But yeah, gold, and he's got a big old club because that is obviously the baseball bat, what gangsters loved using the most. So that's his artwork. Feel free to pause it if you wish, otherwise I will continue on with the review. So heading back to the portal, we can see that there is still no family bonus for the Heroes of the Month. I did misinterpret something on another thing that I saw, but there is still no family bonus. Maybe SGG will add one later down the track, but at the time of this recording, there is nothing for any of the Heroes of the Month. In terms of his personal stats, Thunk comes in with 697 attack, 799 defense, and 1515 HP. So there is a bit of a skewing going from that attack stat towards the defense and HP, making him a bit more of a beefy boy for defensive purposes. His charge speed is set to 50, which is average speed, and requires 10 tiles to charge or 5 ghosted tiles. The speed break does require only +8, which is possible using the Explosion B90, which gives +9. The Pearl Scale Convex is the other purple speed gun. It is insufficient, it only gives +6, so even if you combined it with the emblem charge node, it doesn't get you across the line. So as a result, that class node on the Warfighter talent tree for speed generation is of little to no use at all. On the topic of his class, as I mentioned, he is a Warfighter class hero, which grants him the chance to revive with 1 HP after taking what would normally be fatal damage. The Warfighter talent does have a bit of a history in the game. It has both a proven and a admitted, as well as a conspiratorial theory that it is still busted and giving far higher odds than what it states on their card. So it is generally a talent tree I advise putting at least +1 on to grant your heroes a chance to revive, because it can be quite game changing when they do come back from the brink. By way of a specific emblem path, I personally would recommend going an attack path for Thunk. So it will look something like what I've done here on Sato. So ignore that, it's now Thunk. Basically, you're wanting to prop up his attack damage. He's already got really beefy stats, so there's not really any need to further enhance them. So I would be going that attack path. So we can see I've gone each way, I've picked the attack side. When there is a choice between attack on both sides, I've gone the route with defense. That's just my personal preference. But yeah, we can see more attack, and then I have stopped my Sato at plus 16. I probably would stop Thunk at this same point. As I mentioned, you don't really need more defense nodes on him, so you can save your emblems to use elsewhere. And we also discussed that that speed node is of little / absolutely no relevance, so you don't need plus 19. And the plus 20, it is an awful lot of emblems for very little return. Like, Sato has a much higher attack stat than Thunk, and it's only 34 attack points for 250 emblems. So yeah, not really worth it for me personally. So I stopped most of my attack path heroes at plus 16 or lower. Cool, back to the portal and we can have a look at his card. So his card special skill is titled Superpowered Swing, and at level 10 skill and 50 charge speed, it will deal 360% damage to the target and nearby enemies. This attack bypasses all defensive buffs, including counter attacks. It will then apply an increased damage ailment to the target and nearby enemies, where they take 30% more damage for 4 turns from the opposing strong element. He will then also apply the shock ailment to the target and nearby enemies, which will remove 224 HP each time they receive a buff for the next 4 turns. This effect cannot be cleansed. So, a little bit going on in there. So let's break it apart a little bit, starting with the direct damage. So damage, as always, it's easy to calculate in a single instance, but because of the variability that feeds into the calculation, it's not exactly the easiest thing to normalize and consistently calculate. So what I do instead to compare is I calculate their attack power, which is their attack stat multiplied by the percentage in their special skill, which is ultimately analogous to their damage output in the end. So in the case of Thunk, we can see he comes in with an attack power of 2,509 per enemy. If we normalize that against his speed, which is 50 and the 10 tiles to charge it, we come out with an attack power per tile of 251, which, as we see right there, comes in number 1 of the purple DOA 3 hitters, which is really awesome. You know, like, straight up, on a defensively oriented stat hero, to come out on top is pretty impressive, and most of that is resultant from the 360%. Like you can see on that list, he actually has the highest percentage of the purple DOA 3 hitters. The next closest is Wade when hitting a status ailment at 330, followed by Triptych at 325. So you can see how much of an impact that 360% actually has on his net damage output. Some of the other options in that list, you know, as we mentioned, we've got Triptych at 223 attack power per tile, Darkskull at 186, Hypernova, who you're probably most familiar with, on defense teams comes in at 155 when you don't include her delayed damage. Then you've got some vanilla options like Mirage at 122, Xavier at 118, and so forth on that list. So the interesting thing with Thunk coming in at 251 is he's also actually the fourth hardest hitting DOA 3 hitter in the game. So there are 3 that are better than him. They are in order. You've got Spite coming in at 296 attack power per tile. He's a yellow mercenary hero. Fungi Beats, who is a blue mutant, he comes in at 291, and then Whack, who is probably the most comparable hero to Thunk, he comes in at 287 attack power per tile. Even higher when Whack is attacking armor, I'll also point out. So yeah, 4th best is pretty good, as I said, for someone that is defensively oriented with his stats. So very, very good from that perspective. Moving on from the damage, the next part of his skill is the bypass of defensive buffs. So this is where it says the attack bypasses defensive buffs, including counter attack. So this is a little bit of a weird and a bit misleading in how it's written. The way it's written is it seems to not really apply to any specific line item. If anything, it kind of infers that only the damage component is affected by the bypass, when in reality, the entire skill will bypass defensive elements. So That's just one thing that's a little bit hinky with how it's written. The second thing that is a little bit different is that what constitutes a defensive, quote-unquote, buff. So historically in Empires and Puzzles and early days in PuzzleCombat, small giant games applied the definition that defensive buffs were only buffs that affect the defense stat in the damage calculation. So things like increased defense against purple, or added defense against special skills, or even just a straight up defense stat improvement. However, today in PuzzleCombat, the definition is a lot less cut and dry. There are other buffs which are for some reason considered defensive, even though they don't actually do anything towards the defense stat. So the two most notable ones are ailment immunity and ailment reflect effects. So I will say right now, I do not understand why SGG made this change. I suspect that it is a case where there was a bug in the game, quote unquote, a bug, and it has not been fixed, and it's just been made a working as intended or a feature, which has happened previously. SGG have a history in this game of saying, yes, that's a bug, never fixing it, and instead making it a feature. All right. I won't comment too much more about this because A, I don't agree with it, B, it annoys me, and C, I personally think that the way that this is written, it is and operates in the game, it is far too powerful and unbalanced. If the defensive buffs list was tightened up and reverted to the long-standing definition that SGG have used, where it's only buffs that affect the defense stat, I will retract this comment. But right now, I see it as being unbalanced. And the end result is that there is very little that you can do as a player to actually protect or prevent Thunk from, and others that have this effect, from applying their ailments to your team. And the only thing that really still works is dodge and taunt. Ultimately, even taunt doesn't really do that greatly. It just stops it from applying to nearby enemies. So yeah, that's enough about that line, because it is only one line and it's small, but I talk about it a lot every time it comes up. Next item is the added damage against the strong element. So this reads, the target and nearby enemies receive plus 30% damage for 4 turns when hit by the stronger element. So generally speaking, this effect is extremely powerful in color stacking situations, all right? 30% is calculated against the final damage number. So once it's done all of the buffs and ailments for defense and attack stats, run it through the RNG factor and all of that, and spits out an a damage number. That's then multiplied by like 1.3, and that's the final damage that's applied. The other notable thing is that it only applies to the strong elemental damage. So meaning it's only going to apply for red damage against a green enemy, or in the case of Thunk, he is only going to deal the added damage against a yellow enemy because purple is strong against yellow, all right? It does have its uses in war and raid situations because it will give you a flat increase in your damage output depending on who you're actually targeting and which heroes are involved. But ultimately for me, I see this as having a best application for war machines, because on war machines, you are getting a flat 30% damage increase because you are always going to have a purple color stack against yellow war machine. So you're always going to be triggering that strong elemental damage. So you're getting that bonus all the time, all right? So instead, as an example, instead of your tiles doing 4,000 damage against the war machine when all of your buffs and stuff are active, they're instead going to be doing 5,200 damage per tile. So quite a nice increase in a situation where you're already dealing a lot of tile or strong color damage. It ultimately is not quite enough to warrant Thunk being brought along as an off-color hero against other war machines. As an example, bringing him in a red team against a green war machine, in order to offset the added attack bonus for strong colored damage and against this ailment, you'd actually need a damage increase of about 38 to 40%. So Thunk doesn't quite get there with his 30%, but against a yellow war machine, Thunk is going to be like pretty much a must include. So at the moment, probably the peak yellow war machine team would be Blunderbuss with then Undertaker, Sato, Thunk, and then someone else that's got a high attack stat. Maybe someone like Mirage, who can do charge control, or Shutdown as another example, or even just someone with a really high attack stat or high passive damage. They're going to be a really good inclusion, but Thunk will definitely make it into a lot of people's war machine teams. The final part of his skill is the shock ailment. So this says the shock, the target and nearby enemies will receive 224 damage whenever they receive a buff for 4 turns. This effect cannot be cleared. So it is also quite an interesting effect. Not so much the shock ailment, which is nice, but the fact that it's minus 224 HP. So the majority of shock ailments that we actually see in game are only 112 HP, and usually only runs for 3 turns. By comparison, Thunk's version of shock has double that HP loss per each buff received, and will also last a full turn longer. So 2 things to really note with this. Number 1 is that the shock ailment damage applies per each buff received. So a hero like Senya, who gives off 2 buffs, is going to wipe out 448 HP each time they cast their special skill. The other thing that's really beneficial is that the effect cannot be cleansed. So you're always going to be getting the full turn's worth of damage. One other side note is that for whatever reason, this is classed as damage over time. I genuinely don't understand why shock ailment is classed as a turn-based damage effect, but it can be further enhanced with someone like Whipster or Mastodon, who increase turn-based damage effects. I, again, don't agree with this, and there are other times when I've discussed this at length, but yeah. So overall, for Thunk, I think he is a really great hero, like a really, really great hero. He has got a lot of applications in both war and raid attack situations, because you can use him either as an individual hero to increase your other hero's damage output, or as part of a purple stack to increase purple damage output. He also has some really, really hefty damage and the shock ailment, both of which contribute to a very useful case in attacking situations. Ultimately, though, I do think that the best application for him is against war machines, where you are guaranteed to have a hefty purple stack, and that plus 30% damage is going to be absolutely beastly. So for Thunk's grading, I do rate him quite highly, so I am going to give him an A- for war and raid attack situations. Against war machines, that goes up to an A grade, as I've mentioned a number of times. Very, very good, I think, for war machines. In the events, I'm going to drop him back to an A-, but still keep him quite highly graded. So the reason for this is he's got very good DOA 3 damage. He also increases strong colored damage output. So against the right enemies in the right team, he can actually have quite a noticeable impact on your event competition and also completing the event stages. For raid and war defenses, this is a little bit of a situational one. He does have very good defensive stats, which do lead him to being a bit of a tanky hero. However, purple tanks have a very natural counter and very available counter in the form of 8-bit. So ultimately, I will probably recommend putting Thunk in the flank position if you're going to use him as a defensive hero. He's able to do some pretty good damage. He can increase other damage output. He's got reasonable charge speed and the shock ailment. So I am going to give him an A- for war and raid defenses. But it is untested at this point whether that is accurate in the end. So yeah, war and raid defense is an A-. In the 3 tournament settings, so Bloody Battle, there's no healing, doesn't really affect him, so I'm going to give him an A- for attack and an A- for defense. In the buff booster tournaments, he does have the shock ailment, which does assist him in this format because people do tend to stack buffs a bit more heavily. So I'm going to give him an A grade for buff booster attack and an A- still for buff booster defenses. And finally, for charged attack situations, I am going to bump him up again to the A grade because he does go from 50 speed up to 65. So he can have an A grade for attack in charged attack tournaments and an A- for charged attack defense grading. So overall, that comes out as being an A- for his attack grade and an A- for his overall defense grade. So that just about concludes the content that I have for this review of Thunk. As always, these are just my personal thoughts and opinions on these heroes. I do love hearing your thoughts and feedback on them, so please do drop down into the comments section of the video. Leave me a note. I do try to read and reply to as many of you as I can. If you did find this video to be useful and enjoyed the content, feel free, as always, to like the video, subscribe to my channel for more stuff like this, but most importantly, share the video around, because if this sort of thing is useful for yourself, ultimately, it's also likely to be useful to the people you play with as well. Thank you once again for tuning in and joining me for this review. I do hope that I will see you again soon in another video, but until then, good luck, stay safe, and happy gaming. Cheers, bye!